Today we have an opportunity to talk with one of the pioneers of constructive journalism, Mr. Haagerup. Thank you so much for your time and for the interview for the Televizija Student. Welcome.
Welcome.
You founded the Institute back in 2017 for the constructive journalism with the idea to build the trust back in media. I think that's the fundamental issue nowadays, that people don't trust us. And if people don't trust us, who are we doing this job for?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Yeah. What do you think the media has to change, media culture-wise, to give that trust back?
I think we need to change a lot of things, but one of them is that basically ever since the internet came and destroyed our monopoly of being the only ones who could tell stories to everyone, then we have basically panicked in the news industry, and we're saying in order to get attention from people, we need to focus on stories that are loud, that are extreme, that is dramatic, that is full of conflict. And we do that in order to get people to click on it, because then we could sell the eyeballs to advertisers. What has happened is two things. One, advertising is disappearing anyway, but it's going to Google and Facebook. So that means the financial model underneath independent journalism is being eroded. So now we have to produce stories that people think are important and want to, and meaningful, and in order to spend time on it and maybe even money on it. So that's a fundamentally new way of doing that. But by doing that, clickbait, by doing all the stories about good stories, bad stories, stories about misery, stories about something extreme, that has led that we have lost a lot of people. Especially young people. They don't want to follow that kind of storytelling, and they are appalled by it, and it doesn't speak to them. So we are losing a lot of people, and it has become socially acceptable among people, not only young, to say, I don't want to follow news anymore. It makes me depressed, and I don't trust it. So I think there are a lot of things we need to change, because the fact is that people need journalism more than ever, but the framework around it is more difficult. Both if you work for commercial media or public service media. There's a lot of politicians hammering on public service media and saying, oh, you are stupid, you are biased, you shouldn't be. And some of it is not true. Some of it might be true, that we are sometimes too biased. Sometimes we cut corners and all that. So we should clean up our stuff, not only for our sake and for our media's sake and for the profession of journalism, but for society. But because a democracy, a society cannot work without independent journalism. That's a fact.
Mm-hmm. You have been the editor-in-chief for the Danish public broadcaster.
Yeah.
We can argue that maybe the public broadcaster have an easier job in that way, that they don't have to rely as much on the advertising, on the clickbait. They don't have to produce that kind of content. How did you implement the constructive journalism into the Danish public broadcaster?
Yeah, by starting creating a language around it. That's why we invented the word constructive journalism, which didn't exist, but the word constructive just means having a beneficial purpose. But it's important to have another word for quality, because what is quality anyway? So now you can say what is constructive, and is that constructive, and how can we make it so it's solution focused, nuanced, and engaging? Basically, those three pillars. So talking about that, assigning stories to the best reporters, appraising them for doing that, and the stories. So it's like when I guess you don't have kids yet, but you can choose when you have kids at some point. Either you can hit them each time they do something wrong, or you can praise them for each time they do something right. And same thing in journalism. Instead of hitting people if they do something wrong, praise them for things you want them to do more of. And I think that's the way you change the mindset of a news organization, and change very conservative, very fearful journalists. We're not very good at doing new stuff, but it's possible to help overcome the fear of doing something new if you praise people trying. So that was the way we changed it at DR.
Okay, we talked about what the journalists and the editors should do, but is the audience responsible also in some way? Because we can do perfect stories, we can do fantastic, constructive, solution-based journalism, but if audience is not consuming our products, it's no good. I mean, what I mean by that is in this culture, if it bleeds, it leads, in that mentality focused on conflicts, is there a need for a media literacy for the public?
Actually, we also do that. We have a big media literacy project where we go out and talk to young people between 16 and 20 in order to tell them about the importance of storytelling and in journalism, and what is journalism, and how can you put things on the public agenda with your story. So we try to teach them that and teach them the importance of journalism in the democracy. So yes, you're right that every family has an obligation to make sure that their kids have access to trusted information, and that is part of being a good citizen. But we couldn't say that we could leave that with the audience, because that argument say, oh, but they don't want that, they only click on bad stuff. It might be true if you examine it. Yeah, people have a tendency to click on violent stories and extreme stories more, but they actually don't spend much time on them. People don't read stories about suicide bombs in Yemen to the end. They scan, and they jump to something else. Whereas well-done stories about people, organizations, cities, countries that deals with problems we have and have found another way of tackling it, those stories are really inspirational, and people read these stories to the end. They share them more, and it turns out they're also more willing to pay for a subscription to that media outlet after doing so, meaning it converts better than traditional news. So there's a tendency in the media world that we focus on stupid stuff like click, amount of likes, shares, instead of saying, has this generated more trust? Do people feel it's more meaningful? Does it generate hope? Does it make people smarter? Also about people who are not like themselves? Does it bridge build in the world? Problem is, it's difficult to measure. So if you cannot measure what is important, what you can measure end up for your organization and for you personally to be what is important. And that is the unfortunate thing that has happened in the media industry for the last 15, 20 years. We're focusing on the wrong things, and people are voting with their feet. They are going somewhere else. And we need to reshape. Before we can start talking to the audience, say, hey, come back, maybe we should shape up a little bit first.
We have to talk about the politicians as well.
Yeah, let's do that.
I think it seems to me that they especially enjoy the conflict-based narrative in their campaigns, because I feel it's much easier to do the ad hominem campaign than to actually write a program that is focused on the solving real problems.
I don't know any of your politicians, but I'm sure a lot of the politicians, when they go into politics, they do it for the right reasons. They have ideas, they want to improve life in Croatia, they have ideas to do that. They want to focus on solving people's problems in their way. But then they come into politics and say, I need to make sure that my social media posts travel fast, or outreach. I need to get into the news. I need to be in the TV programs. I need to be in the headlines. And how do I do that? So they hire former journalists. They are now called communication experts, and they tell them the news criteria and the algorithm works like this. You have to hit somebody. You have to be fearful. You have to be extreme in your views. So gradually, nobody wants to listen to the politicians' ideas, but they want to listen to their attacks. So a lot of people fall into that trap, and they spend all their time trying to get attention by talking to algorithms, talking to the news criteria in the news business.
But can we steer them into right direction?
Yeah, we can. If you start, I mean, you are the one deciding what questions to ask. You're the one deciding who's to invite into your program or into your article. If you start thinking, I'm really curious, I want to know, behind that suit, is there an idea, how will you solve the problem of society? we did this election festivals, and just a little thing I didn't mention there. We trained some of the reporters from the local media, from the local TV station, from the local regional radio, to run these political debates up to the local election in a different way. So they, for instance, asked them, could you say something, what is the best thing you have heard tonight from your opponent? They haven't thought about that, but they had to say something nice, and suddenly it was easier for the other person to say something nice about that. And that was surprising for a lot of audience. The journalists would also say, where do you agree on this? Oh, they were not used to thinking about, because they talk each other away from each other. But actually, the critical question is, you claim that you are far away from each other, but if I read what you really want, you basically want the same thing. Might be 2 percentage points in different directions, but basically, isn't it true that you actually agree on this? Very critical question, very popular question with the audience. And suddenly the journalists could write on the blackboard, oh, let's say, where do you actually agree? But they have been trained their whole life to disagree and talk each other away from each other, creating enemies among each other. So we need to do something different, but you control that as a reporter. You decide who to invite, you decide what to ask. So I've learned if I ask different questions in another tone, if I'm curious instead of aggressive, then I get different answers. They relax and they start behaving like human beings, which they are, and suddenly they realize, oh, I can get into his TV programs because he's actually interested in my ideas and not only on my attacks. And then you change the public conversation. They're not stupid people, but the incentive structures in news and in politics is screwed. They're screwed. And we have to fix that, but instead of talking about what they should do differently, you should focus on what you can do differently. And if you do something differently, they change.
Great. Final question. We can just shortly circle back to the social media. What do you think, to what extent are social networks and social media responsible for the degradation of media? It's a popular opinion that now anybody can be a journalist. If you write something on your Facebook wall, if you just publish a video, you think that's in the lines of community journalism, and some redactions rely on that heavily. Do you think that traditional media can win battle over social media, or is there even a battle to win?
I think there is, and I mean, it's a very nuanced thing, right? I mean, social media is not only bad. It has before anybody had to be nice to a journalist to get out to everybody, right? Now everybody has their own access to the public, which is a good thing, basically. But there's also the flip side to social media. The algorithms created, so if you're aggressive, extreme, you travel further. And professional communicators like comms people, politicians, they know that. And also editors know that. So in order to do something different than social media, in order to do something different than AI, which we haven't talked about, what will influence the rest of your career, you have to figure out what is it that you can do that AI can't do? What is it you can do as a journalist that social media can't do? And we have to make the distinction. We have to help each other and help the citizens figure out what is misinformation, what is storytelling based on journalistic values of fairness and accuracy and documentation and all that, which is journalism, and not just storytelling that everybody can do. How do you make a distinction between that? Can we legislate? Can we help each other? Can you put a logo on your newsletter or newspaper, news site, because you obey to these rules? Those assholes is not doing that. Can we help doing that? So there are a lot of things we can do, but the first thing we have to do is look in the mirror and say, what kind of journalist do I want to be when I become a real one? What is my claim to fame? How will I contribute to a better society with the professional skills I have? That's where it starts. It starts with you, and you can change a lot of stuff. And the most difficult thing is changing yourself, but if you do that, you will influence everybody else.
I think that's a perfect answer for the end. Thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.